The 10th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.
Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news. Once again, from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, here is your host, Andrea McMaster.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Consider This. I'm Andrea McMaster. We're glad you could be with us today. This show is a little different than some of the shows that we brought to you in the past, maybe not as serious, but we know that you're going to enjoy this one. This week we have an award-winning author, a Nebraska native. Alex Cava will be joining us. She has written several different books, sold more than 2 million copies, and appeared in New York Times bestseller list, USA Today, well known around the country as well as many as 20 countries. And today she's going to tell us a little bit about writing psychological thrillers, which is your specialty. So first, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
I'm excited to have you here. This will be a great show. Fun for us, a little different than we've done in the past. So let's introduce some of your books first off. One False Move, the latest book, right?
It's not actually the latest one, but it was chosen for the 2006 One Book, One Nebraska project.
Okay, so she's been on tour talking about this book, One False Move, and Necessary Evil is the latest one.
That's the latest one, and it came out in February.
Okay, and then we have Thriller, which is really a book that compiles a bunch of different thriller stories, and Alex Cava has a story in this one as well. So we're going to talk somewhat about these books, but first I just really wanted to get to know you a little bit and to have our viewers get to know you, because you grew up in Nebraska in a small town, right?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your background. I know you went to college in Omaha as well.
I grew up in Silver Creek, Nebraska, which is about 500. My graduating class was 23. And I went to college at St. Mary, which is an all-women's Catholic college. And when I first started writing fiction, everybody told me you need to write what you know. And I write about murder. So I can tell you that I didn't learn that growing up in Silver Creek, Nebraska, thank goodness. But I always wanted to be a writer even when I was a kid, but I couldn't figure out how in the world you'd make a living making up stories and writing them down. So I never ever took it too seriously. Ironically, when I went to college, I majored in art and English because I still loved both of those so much. But most of my background is in marketing and advertising and PR.
And did you write at all as a child? Did you write stories, and what did your parents, were they thrillers or suspense stories?
Well, they were short stories, and I wrote them and actually hid them because both of my parents grew up as children of Polish immigrants. And even though school was important, it was more important to find a trade and make a living, and work ethic was very much drilled into me. So, reading was sort of for leisure. It was sort of something that you did in your spare time, unless it was for schoolwork. So here I was making up stories and writing them down. So I never ever did tell my parents. I would write them down and I would hide them.
And so tell us how you got into deciding, I'm going to do a book. This is later, right after your years being here in college, in which, by the way, did you major in English or writing? Okay.
Yes. I had an art scholarship to go to college, and then I loved English so much I found myself taking a lot of English classes, so I double majored in art and English. But I went to work in public relations. I had my own graphic design business for about 6 years. And I always loved writing. I was still doing writing on the business side, but it wasn't as much fun, creating different public relations things, annual reports and brochures and those sort of things. And it was much later. It was 15 years later, after college, that I decided I didn't want to do what I was doing anymore, so I actually quit my job and decided that I would try and write a novel while I was waiting to figure out what it was that I'm going to do.
So you quit your job, if I heard it correctly, you maxed out your credit cards. And you went on to pursue your dream of writing.
I did.
Which was really courageous.
It was either courageous or it was really stupid.
But you've been very successful. So it worked for you. I'm sure it's...
I was lucky, yes. And I gave myself a time limit. I told myself that if I wasn't published by the time that I was 40, that I'd put it aside and I'd find something else and I'd get on with the rest of my life. And the reason that I did that was because savings do deplete rather quickly when you don't have a job and credit cards max out. And but I told myself that I would put that time limit on it. It took me about 1.5 years to write A Perfect Evil, and about 6 months to find a literary agent, and then another 6 months for him to find a publisher. So 3 days before my 40th birthday, I was in Chicago at Book Expo, sitting next to author Barbara Kingsolver, signing advance copies of A Perfect Evil. So I kind of just squeezed in right under my deadline.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about then writing that first book and sitting down, and what were you thinking at that time? Thinking, I have to make this work?
Well, it actually wasn't my first book, because while I was still public relations director for College of St. Mary, I did write another book, and I sent it out, and it had 116 rejections from literary agents, and it still to this day sits in my bottom desk drawer. So I knew how tough it was. But when I approached it the second time, I really approached it from a business standpoint. I wrote the novel, I did the best possible job that I could on the novel, and then I put it aside and I did all my research on literary agents and how to eliminate as many obstacles as possible to get published.
So why fiction? Why psychological thrillers? I have to say, I got a book from the library recently. You're one of them that I hadn't read, because I had read a couple of your other ones, but at The Stroke of Madness was the one that I read. And I have to say that I didn't want to read this right before I go to bed at night, which is when I do most of my reading, because this one is a little gruesome, and you probably would admit that.
Oh, yes.
And so I didn't want to have nightmares.
Well, and I tell readers, because a lot of times they do notice that it's fairly gruesome, but I tell them, if they haven't noticed, I never ever take a reader through a murder. I love that Alfred Hitchcock approach, where I take you to the edge and I leave you there. And the reason that I do that is because I think that your imagination is so much more twisted than anything that I can put into words. And a lot of times what's really neat about that is that readers bring to the novel their own experiences of what scares them and what they fear and what makes them panic. So I tell readers that if my book scared you, it's a little bit your fault too.
That's good. Well, I know that that's part of it, part of writing, that you want us to think about your characters and what they might look like, what they might do, what are they going to say next, or what's going to happen. You want your readers to become really involved in a book, but that's got to be the greatest challenge of writing. And how do you get readers to go there? I mean, what would you say and how you've developed that style?
Well, I think a lot of people misconstrue that the suspense thriller is all plot driven. And I would argue with that. I would say that mine are really character driven, because if you don't have characters that your readers are going to connect to and somehow care about, I don't care whether they're chasing a serial killer or whether they're sitting down at the kitchen table and trying to figure out how to pay their bills, the readers aren't going to stick with you for 300 or 400 pages. Even if you have the most innovative, creative twist or plot, they still need to care about those characters. So that's the tricky part, is making characters, creating characters that people can relate to. And oftentimes that means creating flawed characters.
Well, tell us a little bit about your best-selling series focuses around an FBI profiler, Maggie O'Dell. And so tell us about how you developed, it has to be the heart of your stories are this main character, I'm sure. So how did you develop her? How did you think this is going to be the focus of most of my stories and my books?
Well, I never intended for Maggie to be in a series. I never intended to write a series. In fact, any of those readers who have read A Perfect Evil, my first book, Maggie doesn't even come into it until like chapter 7, I believe. But readers really connected to her, and the publisher wanted more. Readers, in fact, across the world have connected to her, which is very, very surprising to me. And Maggie has definitely been a work in progress, because I didn't know Maggie that well, and I'm only starting to really get to know her. It's funny because a lot of my really close friends will say that they see traits in Maggie that they see in me, but they're always the annoying ones. They're the ones that, oh, she's so stubborn and she's so, she has such a strange sense of humor. They're not that she's brilliant and that she's beautiful. But Maggie really did sort of come together with just bits and pieces of people that I know. And again, Maggie is a flawed character. She's not the superhero who rushes in and saves the day. She often has problems that she needs to figure out, and even though she's very good at her job, she doesn't play by the rules all the time. So she's a little bit different superhero.
Well, I love Maggie, actually. I enjoyed reading about her too, but can you tell me a little bit about connecting to characters and what makes you a writer, a successful writer?
I have no idea. I mean,
it's working for you.
It is, and I have to tell you, it surprises me because my goal initially was to get a book published and maybe possibly get my foot in the door, and if I was ever so lucky, to make a living doing it. And I have to tell you, it's been bigger and better than I ever expected. So it's sort of like every book I'm really pushing to create new goals for myself because I've already surpassed all my goals. But part of what I did do right in the Maggie O'Dell series is that it's not written from first person. So I get to bring in a whole cast of characters, other people that work with Maggie, other people that she loves or is close to. And in doing that, I have given myself a free rein to sort of go outside the limits of Maggie and bring my readers in with those other characters as well.
Okay. Well, how do you do research before you start writing stories? Because I know the locations seem so vivid, which we have to say that Nebraska is mentioned several times in a lot of your books, and that's probably one of the reasons why this one was chosen then for the Nebraska tour. This one starts in the Nebraska State Penitentiary.
And actually the whole book takes place in Nebraska.
Okay. So, and I know like Lincoln Journal-Star is mentioned, the Omaha World Herald's mentioned, so we have several mentions of Nebraska throughout your books. So what do you do as far as research and developing the locations and the plots? Is there a lot that goes into that?
Not so much the location as there is the forensics. I spend a lot of time doing research because readers are so sharp and so smart due to programs like CSI and Law and Order and those shows, and even internet and cable news. It's hard to keep on top of the technology and just new and different forensics things. But fortunately, I have an array of crime scene experts that I can sit down with and listen to their stories and just talk to. And they have been a wealth of knowledge and inspiration. I mean, I love sitting down with them. The only problem is they always want to sit down for lunch. A lot of times they bring like Polaroids. So that's not so much fun. But they really do a good job of just sitting down and telling me their stories. Truth is so much stranger than fiction that even though I get bits and pieces that I use in my novels from them, I constantly feel like I have to water it down. But a lot of my inspiration, a lot of my ideas comes from sitting down and talking to them. And then I do like to use locations that I know, that I've at least been to, and I sprinkle that with enough real that oftentimes you can't tell what's real and what's not real. And an example of that is I met a woman in Pittsburgh when I was on tour for One False Move when it first came out in 2004. And she loved that the book took place in Nebraska because she had just been there a couple of years ago and could remember some of those small towns that I mentioned. And one of the things that was so vivid to her was the exit sign off of I-80 for Normal, Nebraska. There's no Normal, Nebraska, and she didn't know that. But evidently I had gotten enough of the other things right that she believed that the rest of it was correct too.
Huh, that's interesting. Well, talk about your readers. You've been on tour just recently, or you're still on tour for One False Move around Nebraska, and so you've had a chance to meet some of your readers. I was wondering, just because Nebraskans know that you're from Nebraska, and I know that your books are all over in several different countries, but are a lot of your readers, do you think, come from Nebraska, the state of Nebraska?
Well, it's funny that you should say that because I was probably better known on the East Coast and the West Coast before I became known in Nebraska. And I've been living in Omaha since I came here to go to college. But a lot of people didn't know that. A lot of people didn't know that I was even from Nebraska, even though I was writing bits and pieces. And so this tour, I'm meeting a lot of people that for the first time are starting to read me, that even know that I'm a Nebraska writer, including Nebraska in my novels. But on the East Coast and the West Coast, you could practically walk into any bookstore and find my books. Here in my hometown, it's a little bit harder.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting. Well, I have to say I went to the main library in Omaha, and all of your books were checked out except for one.
Wow, that's great. That's great.
So, but that also, I know that you've been on a tour recently, so we're
Yes.
definitely getting the word out. But what's some of the feedback that you get from readers when they're reading your books? What do they tell you?
Well, a lot of them have fun with it, using that I use bits and pieces of Nebraska, because most authors don't even know much about the heartland, let alone include them in their novels. So a lot of them get a kick out of seeing things that they recognize, places that they recognize. In A Necessary Evil, the first chapter opens with a Monsignor who's killed in a restroom at Epley Airport. And it's funny how many people have enjoyed that and telling their friends who are flying into Epley Airport. But I think for a lot of people, it's kind of neat just to be able to get a sense of Nebraska, because so oftentimes we don't have anybody who's talking about that or who's using that in their novels. So that's what I've been hearing, I think, the most, is that it's an awful lot of fun to finally have somebody who gets, not just gets Nebraska, but actually uses bits and pieces in their novels.
When did you come to a point that you said, this is really going to work? Was it the first time that you were on the New York Times bestseller list or USA Today bestseller list? I mean, was that ultimately your goal?
I don't think that I'm there yet, that it's actually going to work and stick. You know, it's been wild, but I think that the thing that has really impressed me the most is, you know, I never ever imagined my books in any other country. And to see my books in a different language has really been a kick for me. And not just to see that, but to see them making the bestseller list. In Italy, I think we made it up to 16. In the UK, it's been in the top 20. In Poland, the books have reached number 1 and number 3 and number 5. In Australia, I've been in the top 5. And it's so much fun in Australia to see my books above Dan Brown's, you know, the Da Vinci Code. Yes, that's kind of a kick for me, because I never imagined what it was going to be like to get published. That was sort of my goal, let alone to see all of these foreign countries just sort of gobbling it up.
Well, just a little insight. How do you get on some of these best-selling lists?
I have no clue.
I mean, is it involved in a lot of getting publicity out there, or I mean, is it just wholly on getting the book in the right hands?
You know, I think it's all of those. I really do. A Necessary Evil, when it came out in February, we didn't do a whole lot of marketing and promotions, but I did do an 18-city tour across the country, and it was on the extended list of the New York Times for 4 weeks out of the 5 weeks that I was on tour. So possibly it was because people were seeing me or seeing my name, and I did a ton of radio and TV interviews while I was out and about too. But we didn't do any placements of ads, hardly any, for the book. I think it's a lot of combinations of things. It's definitely getting the readers hooked and creating a fan base that's going to follow you. And that is probably the one thing, that once you have readers who are hooked, and they'll constantly come out, and they don't even have to remember what the title is. All they go into the bookstore and say, do you have the newest Alex Kava? That's when you know that, you know, you're doing something right.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of your books. Let's talk about Thriller. This was different, because this wasn't really your idea to be, but you were asked to be a part of this book, right? So tell us a little bit about this. Thriller, stories to keep you up all night. And about 30 different authors are in this one.
All of us are members of a new organization called International Thriller Writers, and we just started this organization actually 2 years ago in September. And it was sort of one of those things that we saw the necessity, because as thriller authors, we don't necessarily get the respect from our colleagues that we would like to have. And so we decided to do our own organization. And the anthology was our very first project, and we actually did that in about a year. All of the authors donated their stories, and not only did we donate them, but they follow our series character if we have one. So my story in Thriller is a Maggie O'Dell short story. And that made it even more different, because there hasn't been an anthology like that. There hasn't been an anthology that we know of simply thriller writers, let alone that follow a series character. But it was one of those acts of love for all of us, and we were so fortunate because it's done very, very well. And so it's done very well for our organization in getting started, because we want to mentor. We had our very first conference this last July, and we gave out the first Thriller Awards. So we've got a big agenda, and it's an exciting group. It's a group of, authors like Clive Cussler and Lee Child and Douglas Preston and Tess Gerritsen and some of those authors who have been writing for a very long time and have already been making the bestseller list for a long, long time. So they don't really even need the organization, except that they want to give back and they want to be a part of a group. And it's been very exciting to be a part of that project and very exciting to be a part of that organization.
Well, I want you to get into a little bit for some people who might want to write, whether it's a thriller or just any type of writing. What would you say to them is sitting down and putting that pen to the paper? Or
Well, another author told me, because everybody always says, well, how do you get over writer's block? And it's like it's this mental thing that there's supposed to be some miracle cure for it. And another writer told me that as soon as she gets writer's block, she develops Velcro butt. And what that means is that you sit down and you write and you write and you write, whether you are inspired or motivated or not. And the idea is that if you really want to write and you want to write for a living, then you need to treat it like it is a job, like it is something that you do. And I think for a lot of writers that's hard because they think that they need to be inspired. They think that they need to be moved by the muse to be able to sit down and get their ideas out. I jot down notes constantly. In fact, when we were doing the Across Nebraska tour, I remember going up through to Niobrara, and I'd never ever been to that part of the country. And yet I'm looking at the beautiful surroundings, and I'm thinking, there's an awful lot of great places to dump dead bodies. And the whole time I'm constantly thinking, I'm writing down notes and I'm jotting down different things like that. But I think that true writers do that. I think that they're constantly looking at everything in a different way, through different eyes, through a different perspective, and jotting down notes, hopefully, and putting those down. And I will tell writers that, especially those who maybe have novels that they're writing, that they may have a more brilliant novel than I've written, but the only difference between them and me is that I was a little bit more persistent. And unfortunately in this business, that's what it takes. And I think that I think we as creative people, as writers, we have a tough time with that, because when we start getting rejections, we take it so personally. It's like they're rejecting a part of us. And I tell writers, you can't do that. If you want to make a living doing this, you have to write the best that you possibly can, and then you set it aside and you treat it like a business. And you sort of put on your business hat and go out and treat it like a professional.
Well, one thing I noticed about your writing that I think was unique from some of the other books that I've read is that you're extremely detailed.
Thank you.
In talking about, so I can really picture something. In talking about the characters and talking about the setting, and sometimes you don't even get to the point of the sentence until later because of all the details that you're sharing. So you are really thinking about everything that's going on. So you must have a vivid picture in your mind of what these characters look like, a vivid picture in your mind of the locations or what's all going on. Because even in the language, and to keep that so alive in what they're going to say next, that has to be a part of it, is it?
Well, it's very much putting yourself into the shoes of the particular character whose point of view you're writing at the time. And I remember reading somewhere that if you really want to write flesh and blood characters, then you don't just walk in their shoes. You need to know what's even in their pockets. And I thought that was a good way to put it, because you really do need to know your characters, and you need to know what they would do and who they are and where they've come from. I don't do a really detailed outline for my characters. I don't do a real detailed outline for my books. And part of that is that my characters constantly surprise me. And I love that they take me in different directions that I never ever expected to go. And a lot of that, I believe, is just sort of sitting back and putting yourself into your character and trying to figure out what they would do next. It's kind of fun to be able to show somebody through another person's eyes what's going on. But I hope that I only include enough that people kind of bring to it their own experiences. The thing that I love about reading fiction is that every single person, if you had 12 people in the same room who were reading one of my novels, they would have somebody else in mind for the main character. And I love that about reading. I absolutely love that we bring our own experiences to that reading session, and we can relate according to our own experiences.
Well, you start to, like in this last one I read, you start to hope, oh, well, I hope they become really good friends, or I hope this works out, I hope they start dating, or whatever, right? You start to personalize, and that's what you want. So I also wanted to hear from you a little bit about, well, I want you to talk real quickly about this book too, A Necessary Evil, and then we'll get to my final question here, because we only have a couple minutes left, but why don't you talk about this real quickly, A Necessary Evil?
Sure. A Necessary Evil is actually the true sequel to my very first book, A Perfect Evil, even though it was written 5 years later. And the reason for that is that I left A Perfect Evil with sort of a cliffhanger, and that's the way that I honestly intended to leave it. But everywhere I've gone, readers have said, you've got to go back to that and wrap things up. There was a character who had sort of gotten away. And I suppose that is like an ultimate compliment, because not only did I create this flesh and blood character that readers could connect to, but they wanted justice to be brought to this character. So A Necessary Evil is truly written for my readers, and it's even dedicated to the readers, because I would have never ever written that book had they not nagged and nagged me.
Well, that's exciting. Well, I want to mention your website, just because I know that you continue to be on tour in Nebraska and other states as well, speaking about her books and a chance to meet you in person. So you can go to her website, which is www.alexcava.com, and on there they have a link for a calendar, and you can see where Alex is going to be speaking. And so that's a good way to find out where you will be, since you do spend a lot of your time in Omaha. And then finally, talk a little bit about, have family members ever said, I'm so freaked out by what you write, or I'm scared to be around you, that you're dreaming up some of this?
Well, my mom is a very good Catholic mother, and she lights candles for me, because you have to understand, I write about killing priests. So this is not something that really sets very well, but she's a good sport about it. You know, family members and my friends have had an awfully good time coming along on this journey with me too. So it's kind of fun to go through even my characters with them. And a lot of times I'll find myself brainstorming with some of them. Well, what do you think would happen here and there? And sometimes that ends up being a pizza session.
Well, that's fun. Well, it was so great to have you here. We were glad to meet you in person and see you. And again, she's going to be speaking across Nebraska and around the country in the next year. So you have a chance to see Alex Cava in person, www.alexcava.com. Thanks again.
This
was great. Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
Nice to have you here.
That went quickly.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 10th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.